Welcome to the Brandy Show, Conversations with. The idea for this type of show came from the very concept of podcasts. They're available to anyone at any time since they stay posted on the internet portal indefinitely. Podcasts that are time sensitive, that deal with issues of the day are fine, but after a month or so, they can be out of date. Taking advantage of the technology, it made sense to me to create a program podcast that would last. It's as current the day it is posted to 6 months or a year from now. So I hope you like our series Conversations with. Thanks for stopping by. Our conversation today is with longtime Michigan football equipment manager and legend Jon Falk. For nearly 50 years, he has been an integral part of Michigan football. He was hired by Bo Schembechler and worked for Gary Moeller, Lloyd Carr, Rich Rodriguez, Brady Hoke, and now Jim Harbaugh. His phone number is on speed dial with players like Tom Brady and Desmond Howard. He's the author of 2 books about his career, and stories about his interactions with the biggest names in Michigan football are entertaining and poignant. Enjoy my conversation with Jon Falk. So, Jon, how did it get for an equipment manager at Michigan to become a legend?
Well, Jim, I've learned one thing about Michigan. When you work or graduate at the University of Michigan, people are going to open the door for you. Now, what you say and how you act once you get inside determines how long they're going to let you stay behind that door. I learned that. But, I grew up in Oxford, Ohio, and I went to the high school, and I was the football, the basketball, and the baseball manager there.
Why did you do that at the first time? Was that something that interested you?
Well, I played 8th grade basketball, and I was the 10th man on the team, and we had 10 players on the team. And we were playing a game, and we were playing a high school, and 6 of our guys fouled out. So the coach came down to me, and he says, "Okay, Falk, I got to put you in." So I run on the field, run onto the floor. After I got on the floor, they gave me a technical because it didn't report to the scores table. The coach came down to me and said, "You knucklehead, what is wrong with you?" And I said, "Coach, you told me to go in the game. I did." "You got to check in first. What's wrong with you?" And he walks away from me. Well, that day we got beat 52-8. But I had 2 of those 8 points.
You had 2 of the 8.
I had 2 of the 8 points. But I learned one thing. I wasn't going to be a good athlete. So when I went to high school, I walked over one day to watch the high school team practice. My grandmother lived across the street from the high school, so I walked over, and the football coach comes over to me. He goes, "Hey, you want to play football?" I said, "No, sir, I don't think I want to play, but I'd sure like to help the team." He said, "You want to be a manager?" I said, "Well, what's a manager do?" And he said, "Pretty much anything the head coach tells him to do," which was good advice, because that's one of the reasons I was able to work this long. And I said, "Okay, I'll do that." So I was the manager of the football team. I mowed the grass on the field. I painted the lines on the field. I took care of the equipment, the helmets, the shoulder pads, the shoes, the players, the coaches. And I did that for 4 years in high school. I was the football, the basketball, the baseball manager.
Now, the deal is you got to Michigan because you went to Miami, right?
I went to Miami, Ohio.
And Coach Schembechler was coaching at Miami at the
Right.
time.
The story is that my mother wanted me to go to college. My dad, he wanted me to stay home and work on the farm. And there was quite a discussion of what was going to happen to me. And my mother finally said, "Look, he's going to Miami. I want him to go to college." Well, I wasn't sure whether I'd get the grades to get into Miami. So I had to take something called an ACT test, which I'd never heard of before in my whole life. But I took it. And when I went to turn the test in, I didn't put the grade, my school. I didn't put Miami down to get the grades because I wanted to see them first because I was afraid of how bad they could be. And the proctor there says, "Aren't you Jon Falk?" And I said, "Yeah." "Well, you don't have a school down here." I said, "No, ma'am, I don't want anybody to see my grades yet." And she said, "I know your mother. Your mother is Jean Falk. She wants you to go to Miami." So I'm putting Miami down for the ACT score. So they got my ACT score. 5 weeks later, I got a letter. I've been accepted to Miami University.
How about that?
I was proud as a peacock. So finally, one day, somebody told me, "Jon, anybody that lives within a 50-mile radius of Oxford, they had to let you in anyway." But I didn't care. I got my chance.
And you became the manager for the football team, and Bo Schembechler was the coach, right?
That's exactly right.
And did you do it the same way, or did you apply?
Well, I went over to see the equipment manager during the summer before I got into Miami, and he remembered me from high school because he said he used to go and watch the high school games, so he asked me to work in the equipment room. So I did. And the first time I met Bo Schembechler, I got to be very honest with you, I was scared. He yelled a little bit at me, and I kind of went back to the back of the corner of the equipment room. But as time went on, I progressed. Well, then my sophomore year, what I did was I'd go to classes in the morning. I'd come over to hand out the football equipment in the afternoon. So I worked for the football, the basketball, and the baseball teams. And I was the baseball team manager. I traveled with the baseball team everywhere they went. My sophomore year, the equipment manager passed away. So I remember Coach Schembechler calling me up to his office, and he says, boy, we got to go out and play the University of Pacific this week. And since you're the only guy down in the equipment room now that knows what's going on, I'm going to have to take you with me. Now, have you ever been to California before? And I said, sir, no, but I've been to the Cincinnati Stockyards quite a few times. And he says, you'll do real well in San Francisco. So I took off, and that was my first trip to California.
And the thing about this is that when you got to Michigan, when you came to the University of Michigan, which begins this great legendary career, it was Bo Schembechler who talked you into going, but you wouldn't go until your mother and grandmother gave you the word, would you?
Well, what happened was, after they hired me on at Miami University after I graduated as the first assistant equipment manager at Miami in the history of the school. So I worked there for 3 years. Well, one day the athletic director came out and says, hey, John, Bo Schembechler called. He wants to talk to you. I said, what's Coach Schembechler want to do with me? I said, what's up, Coach? He said, I'd like for you to come to Michigan. I want to talk to you about being the equipment manager here at the University of Michigan. So I got in my car, drove to Ann Arbor. Came up, and he talked to me for a while. He said, let me tell you something. You come to Michigan, and you'll have doors open for you that you never dreamed of in your life. Now, what do you know about Michigan? And I said, well, Coach, I know that Bo Schembechler is the football coach. I know that Michigan and Ohio State play every year for the Big Ten Championship, and I know everybody in Ohio hates Michigan. And he said, you pretty much got it summed up. He said, now, what do you want to do in life? What would be a goal that you would like to do? And I said, oh, Coach, I'd love to go to the Rose Bowl one day. I watched Ohio State go to the Rose Bowl. Well, when I said that, Coach Schembechler's face got redder than a firecracker, and he blew out of that chair, and he says, Michigan should have gone to the Rose Bowl last year, not Ohio State. Michigan. He said, but if you come to Michigan, you're going to go to the Rose Bowl. But he said, you got one problem. You got to leave Oxford, Ohio, where I grew up. You got to leave your mother and grandmother, who I lived with for years. And he said, I don't know if you can do that, but you got to answer that yourself. I can't tell you what to do. So I went back home, and on the way I got to about Dayton, Ohio. And I said to myself, am I, Jon Falk, to go to a Rose Bowl and living in Oxford, Ohio? There's no way I'm going to go to a Rose Bowl. So when I pulled into the drive, my mother and grandmother were waiting on me. They had hound dog eyes, and they looked at me and they said, what are you doing, Johnny? And I said, I'm going to stay here to take care of you two. I'm not going to go to Michigan. With that, I went to bed. 4:30 in the morning, my mother came in crying. She says, Johnny? I said, Mother, why are you crying? She said, it hurts me. It hurts me really bad to tell you this. But tomorrow morning, you're going to call Bo Schembechler. You're going to Michigan. Michigan and Bo Schembechler will take care of you. So the next day, I called Coach Schembechler. I said, Coach Schembechler, my mother says I should go to Michigan. And he says, your mother's a very smart woman. I'll see you in 3 days.
And great advice by her, too, because it turned out to be a career that you never even imagined you could ever have, right?
Jim, I've only had 2 jobs in my whole life. Miami of Ohio for 3 years and here at the University of Michigan for 45. And it's been a great experience. I mean, if it hadn't been for Bo and my mother, I probably wouldn't have taken that job.
What did you learn when you got here about the job and how big the job became?
Well, at first when you walk into a big school like Michigan, I treated it like a Miami of Ohio. Matter of fact, Bo even told me, he said, now you got to understand one thing here. Miami of Ohio and Michigan are almost the same type of students, almost the same type of kids. It's just a little bigger. And when I got here, I realized how much bigger and more that you do at Michigan and the exposure that you get at Michigan. I mean, when people know you, when you work for Michigan, you walk down the street, hey, you work for Michigan football. Hey, you work for Michigan. And I learned how big that was. And then when we started traveling on the road, of course, that was a big experience for me to one of those trips. I began to realize real fast how important the Michigan and Ohio State was. I knew when I was a kid watching on TV that it was something, but I never realized how big the something was.
When did it first hit you, how big it was?
Well, we played Ohio State in 1974.
Yeah.
It was my first time to Columbus, Ohio, to walk into that stadium. I realized then that this is a different show here. This is a big-time show. That's a big stage. And I realized how tough it was to win at Ohio, because, of course, that year, 1974, we went out to a 10-0 lead, and then we tied it at 10-10, and kid from Ohio kicked 4 field goals to beat us 12-10. We missed a field goal at the end of the game that would have sent us to the Rose Bowl. So I missed my chance to go to the Rose Bowl. But the one thing Bo told me was, when I talked to him about coming here, he said, Falk, I'm in discussions right now about making sure that nothing ever happens to a Michigan team like it's happened in the last few years. There's going to be another bowl game. We're going to make sure the Big Ten can get into another bowl. It just so happened in '75 they passed the rule, so we were able to go to the Orange Bowl that year. So there again, I realized how big the Orange Bowl was, how big, because you read about it and you listen to it on TV, but you don't know how big it is until you get there. And I realized then, man, you're in a big place.
Speaking about how big it is, as an equipment manager, you had relationships with other coaches besides Bo. One of them was Woody Hayes, because you kind of were the liaison between Michigan and Ohio State when Ohio State came up here. So you had your run-ins with Coach Hayes, the legendary coach at Ohio.
I remember we played Ohio here one year, and Coach Schembechler called me over. He said, Falk, go over there and you tell Coach Hayes to take the field first. You say to him, Bo Schembechler demands that Woody Hayes takes the field first. So I walked across the tunnel there, and I knocked on the door, and Coach Hayes answered the door, and he rolled his lips like he usually does. I said, Coach Hayes, I just talked to Coach Schembechler, and he would really appreciate it if you take the field first. Well, he looked at me, and he slammed that door shut. I about got my fingers caught in the door. I went back over, and I said, Coach Schembechler, I don't think Coach Hayes wants to take the field first. He took his index finger, like he usually does, and pries your ribs apart like he goes, you know, and he said, Falk, they go back over there, and you tell Woody Hayes that Bo Schembechler is demanding and forcing him to take the field first. So I went back over again, I knocked on the door, and I said, Coach Hayes, listen, I just talked to Coach Schembechler, and I would really tell you, he would appreciate it so much, sir, if you take the field first. He slammed the door, and then he opened it up, and he walked down the tunnel. And that's begin again to realize what kind of a guy Woody Hayes was, too. He was a great guy.
Yeah.
He was a great guy.
And your relationship with Bo was so good because you were here for his entire career. He actually hired you. You became more than just an equipment manager. You became kind of a friend, a guy that he would call when he was in need, right? You picked him up once on the highway. This is a great story when it was snowing.
Back in 1980, February of 85. And I'm driving down I-94, and it's 30 below zero, and the snow's coming down. And I'm debating twice whether I want to go to Detroit or not. And I kept going. And finally, I saw a guy thumbing on the side of the road. He had a hat that looked just like Bo's. And I said, wow, that guy's got a hat that looks just like Bo's hat. I went a little further and said, oh, wait a minute, that's Bo's car. So I got off the highway. I ran back, and there was Bo, shaking, looking at me, and he goes, I'm never so happy to see your ugly face in all my life. And I looked at him and said, now, wait a minute, Bo. You better treat me nice. My car's running, and it's warm. So I helped him get into the car, and he's sitting in there, and I got the heater blowing, and he's rubbing his hands. And Falk had been on the side of that road for 45 minutes, and not one person stopped. 3 state troopers went by. They didn't even stop. Now, you'd have thought, Falk, somebody would have recognized me. I said, hey, Bo, you know, you were 6-6 last year. To which Bo looked at me, and he says, why don't you just shut up, get me to the airport, and get my car in the driveway for tomorrow morning. And I said, Bo, I got plans. He said, well, your plans just changed. So I dropped him off at the airport, and I called a record company, got his car, got it started up. I had it in his driveway the next morning. But he was a friend.
That's what I mean. He was a friend. And one of the things is you guys were good at kidding each other. Tell the story about you taking him to the hospital once when he was stricken with kidney stones.
Oh.
And you were scared to death.
I was scared to death.
Tell that story.
Because it was 7 o'clock in the morning. I was in the equipment room, and I heard a knock on the back door. And I opened it up, and here was Bo. I said, oh, no, my God. He said, no, it's not in my chest. It's in my stomach. Help me. So I helped him get in the car, and I drove him to the hospital. I walked in to the emergency room. They took him back, and I sat there with him. So I called Millie just to make sure that I said, hey, Millie, I got Bo here at the hospital. First of all, I want to tell you, it's not his heart. And Millie said, "Oh, good, John. Thank you for telling me that right off the bat." But I said, "Millie, I'll stay here with Bo all day, and I'll bring him home that night." So we were there for about 11, 12 hours. And he went through a lot of pain. And then after he got the pain over and the stone had passed, we're coming back to his house, and he goes, "Hey, Falk, you thought that was it, didn't you? You thought that was the big one, didn't you?" I looked at him and I said, "Well, sir, I got to be honest with you. I didn't think you and I'd be laughing after today, but we are, and I'm happy for that."
The thing about Bo is that he was your friend well after he left Michigan, too.
Oh.
He kept you, and you kept him, that relationship alive. And that's one of those things you just don't have happen with a head coach, the guy like Bo Schembechler.
Well, you know what? We just got along well together. We understood each other. I mean, I learned an awful lot about how coaches think when I was with him, and then I started applying that. You know, he gave the test to our toast to our wedding.
Yeah,
you know?
I know. How do coaches think? You learned that from him, right?
Yeah, I learned that. How do coaches think? First of all, you always think about the team first. Anything you decide, you got to make sure how's it going to affect our team. The second thing is you want to make sure, and you want to look ahead. Every day you're looking ahead. What's coming up tomorrow? What's coming up next week? What's coming up the week after that? And every time you make a decision, you have to make sure it's the right one to help the team win. Because Bo told me, "I want you in that locker room every night. I want you talking to those players. I want you teaching them about the passion, desire, and the dedication that it takes to win for Michigan." And I'll tell you a great story. 1976, okay? Now, we hadn't beaten Ohio State down in Columbus since Bo had been here. So, I'm a son of a gun if he calls me in August. He says, "Falk, they have a kicker down at Ohio State by the name of Tom Sladany. Now, he punched the ball to the moon. How are we going to return those punts? Because they're so arching high. We don't have anybody kick like that. How are we going to return those punts?" I said, "Hey, Bo, I got a kicking machine called a jugs machine. I'll order that, and we'll do that." I did. Every 15 minutes, every day, we pushed that ball through that machine. We practiced the Michigan return team against the Ohio State punt team every day. Return that punt, return that punt. Jimmy Smith was back there every day, bringing it back 10, 15, 20 yards. And one day I got a phone call from the athletic director's office, Don Canham, and the secretary said, "Hey, John, you better come down and see Mr. Canham. He's pretty upset." I said, "What's he upset about?" She said, "I don't know, but he's really mad." So I walked into his office, and I said, "What's up, Mr. Canham? What is a jugs machine, and who told you to spend $10,000 to get this jugs machine?" I said, "Mr. Canham, they have a kicker down at Ohio State by the name of Tom Sladany. Now, he punched the ball to the moon, and we got to learn to bring that back. Now, Mr. Canham, if somebody walked into your office and said, 'Hey, if you can buy the moon to beat Ohio State, what would you do?' Canham looked at me and he said, 'Pay the bill.'" So we got down there, and true to form, he was punting that ball out of the sky. And true to form, there was Jimmy Smith bringing it back every day. We ended up beating those guys that day, 22-0. It was just a great win, and I never forget at the half, we intercepted a pass in the end zone at a tied game, 0-0. We ran into that locker room, and I was going around telling them, "This is it, man. This is our chance to go to the Rose Bowl. This is it." Well, just then Bo walked in. And he says, "Men, that game out there, it's over today. It's going to be Michigan today, men. It's going to be Michigan. We just made Woody Hayes pass the football."
It's interesting you talked about that with Sladany and players. You have had a great relationship with the players, too, as they've come through. Everybody who comes through, John,
Well,
talks about Jonny Falk and all the great stuff that Jonny Falk has done and given them through their careers.
Jim, you have to treat those players nice every day. And take Tom Brady, for instance. I remember Tom Brady when he played here. They were taking the team. Half the time Drew Henson was playing quarterback. Half the time Tom Brady was playing quarterback. And as I told you, Bo taught me to walk around that locker room. And so I did. So every day I'd walk in, and I finally looked at Tom Brady's eyes one day. So I said, "Hey, Tom, I need to see you." So I called him in my office, and I said, "Now, Tom, I can see in your eyes you're upset because you're not starting. But I want you to know something, Tom. You're the leader on this football team. Everybody looks to you. If you show any signs of disgruntlement, we're not going to win the championship. The championship's bigger than you, and it's bigger than me. Tom looked at me and said, "Oh, Big Johnny, I've been wanting to talk to somebody about this for a long time." So he spilled his guts with me. When he got done, I looked at him and said, "Okay, Tommy, now here's the deal. You're going to go back out in that locker room. You're going to be the leader of this team. You're not going to show any type of disgruntlement. You're going to play the game, and I promise you, keep your mouth shut, and you'll play football here in a couple weeks. You'll be the starter." Well, that's just how it turned out. But you know, Tom Brady never forgot that. Because every time, now he's one of my best friends, and I text him every time he, in fact, I used to walk in the locker room and I always say, "Hey, I've got 17 Big Ten championship rings." And everybody always asks me which ring is my best ring. Well, my best ring is going to be my next ring. Well, Tom loved that. So every time I'd walk in the locker room, he'd say, "Hey, Big Johnny, which ring's your best ring?" And I said, "Tommy, it's the next one. It's the next one."
Did you see Tom Brady being the Tom Brady that he is in the NFL, that first ballot Hall of Famer, 6-time Super Bowl champion?
Sure, why not? You know, I saw a man who was a great leader. I saw a man who took players that followed him. And I knew that if he got to be in a good pro situation, that he could get those players to follow him. And that's what he did. That's what he did. He had Drew Bledsoe, I think the guy he had to end up beating out. Drew Henson was the guy. So I tell people, he learned how to beat out Drew here at Michigan, you know.
What about the other great players you've had? Brady obviously was one, but you've had
Rob
two
Lytle.
Heisman Trophy winners, though.
Rob Lytle, too.
Rob Lytle, another one in the 70s. What a great player. And there's a guy that went from running back in a big position of quote-unquote notoriety to a fullback, which is a little lesser position. But it was for the team, wasn't it?
Rob Lytle, let me tell you a story. In 1976, we went to Purdue. We were number one in the nation. We got beat 16-14. Bo walked into the locker room after the game, and he was so disheartened. He said, "Men, you blew it today. You blew it. You had it in your hand, and you blew it." He looked at me and he says, "I don't want anybody on this locker room. Nobody. These kids are going to think about what they did today." So when he walked into his office to shut that door, there was complete silence in the locker room. Well, I walked over to Robbie Lytle, and I said, "Hey, Robbie, I don't really know what Bo's talking about, but I want you to know something. If we beat Illinois next week and we're down to Columbus to beat Ohio, we're going to the Rose Bowl." And he says, "What do you mean?" I said, "It's head on head. It's who beat who." And he says, "We'll go to the Rose Bowl, beat Ohio State?" I said, "You're right." Robbie Lytle got up in that locker room, in a quiet Truman locker room, and he says, "Men, I played the worst football game of my life today, but I want you to know this. These next two games, I'm going to play my best. And I'm asking each one of you men to play your best, because we're going to beat Illinois next week, and we're going down to Ohio, and we're going to beat Ohio State, and we're going to go to the Rose Bowl. And we're going to go to the Rose Bowl." All of a sudden, all the players said, "We're going to the Rose Bowl." They stood up, and that was it. And that's the leadership that you have to have on a football team.
And Heisman Trophy winners, Charles Woodson,
Desmond
unbelievable
Hard,
player.
Woodson.
And then Desmond had a great
Desmond
year.
Hard, both of those guys, I mean, they were just great players. They were fun to watch.
And they still talk to you like you're their buddy from college, don't they?
Well, I would hope so. Yeah, I mean, yeah, all of them. You know, I mean, they were your buddies. You took care of them. You didn't. I learned one thing after a team practice, or a player practices in the evening, comes off the field. You don't want anybody yelling at you. You want to go in. I patted them on the back. I asked them how they were doing, and while I'm patting them on the back and while I'm talking to them, I'm looking in their eyes and I'm just seeing what those guys are really thinking, because your eyes never lie, and you can tell exactly what somebody's thinking. And Desmond and Charles, they were both very determined individuals. They wanted to play their best every game. In fact, Desmond Hard against Michigan State back in 1990. You remember we went for two there and got it to try to get it to win the game, and the defensive back interfered with him or whatever, you know, and tripped him, and he fell and didn't catch the ball. I saw that defensive back. Eddie Brown was his name. I saw him at the football convention a few years ago. I said, "Hey, you're the guy that interfered with Desmond Hard in the end zone back in 1990s. "Oh, no, man, that was clean. That was clean." I said, "Okay." So we talked and laughed up Michigan and Ohio State for a few days. And then finally I said, "Okay, see you later, Eddie." And as he walked by me, I said, "Watch out now, Eddie. Don't trip me as you walk by me."
You, again, talking about Charles and talking about Desmond. Desmond won the Heisman Trophy while he was playing for Gary Moeller. And Lloyd was coaching when Charles Woodson won the Heisman Trophy. So you lasted from Bo, and you went to Mo, and then you went to Lloyd. Tell us about the transition with those two guys.
Between all three of them? Or?
Yeah. Well, they were both, Mo and Lloyd were both Bo disciples.
Here's the thing. Yeah, you're right. That's the key. I was just going to tell you. They all learned, number one, how to treat the guys on the staff from Bo. Because Bo treated every one of us the same. We were all, no matter who we were, whether you were the trainer, the equipment manager, or a football coach, everyone was the same, and he treated everybody like that. So when of course, when Mo took over, Mo did the same thing. And then when Lloyd took over, he had the same qualities as those two guys.
And both of them were really successful.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Gary Moeller had a great time here. Man. His record against Ohio State was pretty good.
Yes, it was.
He was 3-1 against Ohio State. Lloyd had started out great, but then as the years went on, Ohio got better and better, and we ended up, I don't know what it was, but he had a great beginning. I mean, when Ohio State played Michigan, they knew they were going to lose. In 1996, they had the best team in the world. We had to play them in Columbus, the best team in the world, and they were up 9-0 at the half. Well, we came out that second half, and we ended up beating them 13-9. But I remember standing on the sidelines, and those defensive backs were standing next to me, and I'd say, "We're Michigan. Hey, Ohio, we're Michigan. We're Michigan." And they just looked at you, and they wouldn't say. Well, I saw Eddie George at the Rose Bowl back in 2000, I think it was, when we were there, and I walked over. Eddie George, Jon Falk from Michigan. He goes, "Oh, Michigan." He said, "Let me tell you." Of course, we beat them that year, 1995. And they had a great team. I said, "You know what? I love to watch Michigan play." I shouldn't tell you that because I'm from Ohio State, but he said, "I love to watch Michigan play." He said, "I really respect him." I said, "You know, that's funny, Eddie. We feel the same way about Ohio State. We love to watch Ohio State play."
What about another player, a kid named Jim Harbaugh?
Jimmy
Now,
Harbaugh.
as a player, now he comes as a coach. And that basically hires you back. So let's start with Jimmy Harbaugh as a player. And did you see him having this great coaching career?
When Jim moved, he lived here. Then he moved out to California, of course, when Jack got the job at Stanford. And he ended up growing up in California. So one day I heard a rumor that he might be going to Miami of Ohio. So I went in to see Bo. I said, "Bo, what's the story about this Jimmy Harbaugh going to Miami of Ohio?" Bo looked at me and he says, "Hey, Falk, Jimmy Harbaugh is coming to Michigan. He just doesn't know it yet." And a couple weeks later, when they signed him, he called me and says, "Falk, Jimmy Harbaugh is coming to Michigan. He's going to be one of the greatest quarterbacks that ever played here. He will be a great player for Michigan." I said, "You mean that little guy used to run around the locker room picking up sweatbands and dirty socks?" And it's the same guy, Falk, and he'll be a great player in Michigan. So he came in as a great player, you know. Now, in 1984 there, in the spring, early before spring, something happened up in a dorm, so Bo kicked him off the team. So Jimmy came down to me and he says, "Well, Big John, you're about the only guy left I can talk to." I said, "Come on in the office, Jim, and talk to me here. What's going on?" So we talked for a while, and I said, "Tell you what, Jim, I'm going home this weekend to see my mother and grandmother. Jump in with me. We'll drive down to Oxford, and from there we'll go over to Indiana because Michigan's playing Indiana basketball. I'll introduce you to my buddy Bobby Knight." So that's what we did. I took him over to Indiana, and I said, "Coach Knight, I want you to meet Jim Harbaugh. He's going to be the quarterback at Michigan here soon, but right now Bo kicked him off the team." Bobby looked at him. He said, "Let me tell you something. If Bo Schembechler kicked you off the football team, he did it for a reason. Learn and don't ever do it again."
How did you get to know Bobby Knight, too? Because you knew a bunch of guys. You knew baseball managers, Sparky Anderson, Jim Leland.
Oh, yeah.
You knew Bobby Knight really well.
Bobby Knight was a great friend of mine. But I got to meet him. You get to meet those guys through Bo. Because once somebody finds out that Bo trusts you, and they're a friend of Bo's, you're a friend of theirs now, too. And that's the way Bobby was. Once he realized that Bo trusted me, I remember back in 1976 or 77, when it snowed here, and they shut Ann Arbor down, and we had to play Indiana that day. So it was my job to go out pick Bobby Knight up at the hotel where they were staying, and every day I'd pick him up, drive him into town. "Hey, can you believe this, John? I got to live in Ann Arbor, Michigan for 2 more days." But yeah, I got to be really good friends with Bobby Knight. I'll tell you here. I'm going to tell you an interesting story. A few weeks ago, I had a little problem with my heart. I had an AFib and atrial flutter, heart flutter. I always go see Tom Izzo when he comes into town. He found out that I wasn't feeling good. Do you realize he called me up on Friday morning before the Michigan game to ask me how I was doing? But that's the type of guys. You learn to have relationships. And like I tell you, Michigan will open up doors for you that you never realized.
So Jim is a player, and you kind of got him straightened around. Now he comes in and he's the head coach.
Yeah. Well, here's what happened.
How did Jon Falk understand and know that one? Because you had basically retired.
I'd retired
After Rich Rodriguez and Brady Hoke. You kind of retired.
I set out the 14 season. Okay, the 2014 season, and it was a long year. That was hard for me because I was so used to going to work all the time, and used to being around the guys all the time, and laughing and joking and being on the inside of sports, because that's all I know. That's all I know about people and sports. And the night before Jim Harbaugh got introduced as the head coach at Michigan, he called me. He says, "Hey, Big John, I want you and your wife Sherry to come tomorrow. I want you to sit there in the first row when I get introduced." So Sherry and I showed up. They had a breakfast in the morning, and you were there, and other people were there, and we all talked. And Jim, in his introduction speech, looks out. He says, "You know what?" I look out in the crowd there, and I see Gary Moeller, Lloyd Carr, Jerry Hanlon, Jack Harbaugh, and Jon Falk. When I see those men here, I know Bo Schembechler is still around Michigan. And to be honest with you, that's kind of something that I'm kind of proud of. I'm proud of the fact that I'm still able to carry a little bit of Bo Schembechler around Michigan football. And that means something to me.
And for Jimmy to basically remember Bo and kind of carry Bo around with him too means there's a connection with the past, don't you think?
Yeah, there's no question, because even now, after Jimmy hired me back here to work, I work part-time for him now.
Why in the world did you come back?
Well, the equipment...
You're retired, John. Why come back?
Well, the equipment manager had left to go to Tampa Bay. So Jim calls me in one morning and says, "Hey, John, do you want your old job back?" And I said, "You know what, Jim? I really don't want that old job back. What do you want?" He said, "I need somebody to help me because we're going to Florida to practice." So I called Sherry up, and I said, "Hey, Sherry, I just talked to Jim, and he needs me to come back to help work with Michigan football. What do you think?" And she said, "Listen, if Jim Harbaugh needs you and Michigan football needs you, you got to go back." So I came back. I helped him during the spring football. We hired a nice guy, and he's the equipment manager now, Gary Hazlett from Stanford, and he's a good friend of mine. So I went up to Jim, and I said, "Jim, I shouldn't be down there in the equipment room. That's Gary's job. That's not mine." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what. I want you to come up work for me now." So I'm a senior advisor to the head football coach. And so I'm there with Jimmy. Jimmy, I go in to see him every morning, ask him how he's doing. If the day wasn't good for him, I'll tell him a couple jokes and laugh with him. And he always says, "You know what, I just feel so good, John, when you leave."
And what's your impression of him as a coach? And what's the job he's done at Michigan?
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Before he got here, the last season at Michigan, before Jim Harbaugh was the head football coach, we had the 11th ranked record in the Big Ten. Illinois had a better record than we did in the league, overall wins. Today, last season, we tied for first place. And that means something, Jim. That means something. That means a lot, because he took a program that was 11th ranked in the league, and we brought it up, and now we are number one this past season. Even though Ohio State beat us, we still tied them for first place. And Lord knows, we've tied Ohio State a lot of times for Big Ten championships. So he's done a great job here. He's bringing the players in. He's getting them going. The players love to play football here at Michigan, and he's a tough guy.
And your relationship with Jim goes back to Jack, doesn't it?
Oh yeah,
his dad.
Yeah, his dad's a senior advisor of the head coach too. So his dad, Jack, and I, we work together every day. We do things for Jim.
But didn't you have a relationship with Jack besides when he was the head or the coach, an assistant coach at Michigan? It goes way back, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, because you don't realize who you meet and who you're going to run into as you grow up. I was a freshman in high school, and I was the manager of the football team. We went to Eaton, Ohio, and forgot the footballs. The football coach came over to me and started yelling and screaming at me. "Well, go over and ask the coach from Eaton if you can get some footballs." So I walked over to the football coach from Eaton. I said, "Sir, can I get some footballs to warm up with? We forgot ours today." So he hands me one football. And I said, "Sir, I'm going to need more than one football." And he says, "I've only got two." So I took the one football. And every time they threw a pass and wanted a receiver in warm-ups, the head coach would just look at me and just stare me down. Little did I know that one day that coach, Jack Harbaugh, I'd be working with at the University of Michigan, Little did I know that a guy who was a 1-year-old boy living in Eaton, Ohio would be my boss one day, Jim Harbaugh.
That's what I mean. Football comes full circle. And John, one of the other things, talking about you being a legend, and I really appreciate you doing this, is you have got your name now on the equipment manager's job. So in perpetuity, they have decided to name the Michigan football equipment manager Jon Falk's position. That had to be huge for you.
Jim came out one day during the season, this past season. He said, "You know what, John? You've been here around here long enough now. It's time to put your name in this building." So that's what he told me they were going to do, which was really an astonishing thing. I mean, it's something that, you know what Bo Schembechler said? You come to Michigan, you'll be able to do things you never dreamed about doing. And that's what I did here. I'm able to have my name above that equipment room door. It's the Jon Falk Equipment Manager of Operations. And it had a nice plaque, and the plaque's got a bronze face of me. And I went in to show Jim the first bronze face, and he said, "Nah, John, that looks too old. You want to younger yourself up here a little bit." So I called the guy up, and he took a little bit of some of the jaw off of me and made it look a lot younger. But that's a heck of an accomplishment, and I really, words are hard to describe how I feel about that.
And to close things off here, everything seems to come back to Coach Schembechler, to Bo, doesn't it? and you know it should, because your life almost started at Michigan because of Bo Schembechler, and everybody along the way has had some influence from Bo, and even you. So it all comes full circle back to Coach Schembechler, doesn't it, for you?
Well, yeah, because he's the guy that got me started. He's the guy that took care of me. Bo took care of me. And make a long story short, he and I went down to Ohio. Bo won an award down there. Woody Hayes was going to introduce him down there in Ohio. And on the way down, he said, "John," he said, "Woody's not doing good. I told him not to come here, but he wanted to introduce me." So we got there, and Woody gave a great talk. And in the talk, he talked about the fact is you have to pay forward. You can't pay back. You got to pay forward. On the way home on the plane, Bo says, "Falk, did you see the old man? Did you see what he looked like?" I said, "I did." He said, "He's just so daggone hard-headed." I said, "Yeah, I know, Bo. I got a buddy of mine that's just like that." So we laughed, and that was 1987. 2 days later, Woody passed away. 2006, Bo was told not to come to talk to the team before the Ohio State game. He was told that stay home and rest, but he didn't. Hard-headed as he was, he walked in. I'm in the back of the room. I saw him walk in. He looked just like Woody Hayes did back in 1987. Gave a great talk. I went in afterwards, shook his hand, and said, "Bo, that was a great talk." He said, "Will you tell me the truth, Falk?" I said, "Bo, I'm telling you the truth." He says, "Good, good." I shook his hand. I headed down to Columbus for the game. The next morning, I found out that Bo had passed away. Then I began to realize what Woody Hayes was talking about. You can't pay people back for what they've done for you. You got to pay forward while they're here. You got to pay forward and be nice. So I tell people, I regret that I never got a chance to thank Bo. I never got a chance to tell Bo I loved him. So the next day, after I got that award, I went into Jim's office and said, "Jim, I want you to know, I love you. I love what you've done for me, and I love what you're doing for Michigan football."
Johnny, you've been great. I want to thank you very much for this.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir.
John's a very special guy and a good friend. Hope you enjoyed today's edition of Conversations With. By the way, John's books, 40 Years in the Big House, and If These Walls Could Talk, are still out there. Check Amazon and anywhere books are sold to find a copy. Keep an eye on my Facebook page, Jim Brandstatter 76, for the next edition of Conversations With.